In the glittering excess of 1893 New York, where fortunes were built on steel and ambition, a single act of kindness would shatter the iron gates between two worlds. She arrived with calloused hands and an empty stomach. He ruled an empire from marble halls. What happened next would scandalize Fifth Avenue and rewrite the rules of power itself. The Gilded Age was a time of breathtaking wealth and crushing poverty, where mansions rose like palaces while immigrants struggled to survive. This is the story of Clara Bennett, a young woman who cleaned the floors of Manhattan's most powerful industrialist, and Thomas Ashford, the steel magnate who would risk everything to make her his equal. Their love defied every rule of society, every expectation of class, and every enemy who sought to destroy them. What you're about to hear is a tale of courage, transformation, and a love so fierce it could not be contained by the gilded cages of the elite. Subscribe to our channel and comment below where you're watching from. Let's begin this unforgettable journey together. The morning fog clung to the cobblestone streets of Lower Manhattan like a threadbare shawl. Clara Bennett pressed her shoulders against the November cold, her worn boots clicking a steady rhythm as she walked toward the address written on a crumpled piece of paper. 23 years old, auburn hair twisted into a practical bun, she carried everything she owned in a small canvas bag. Her father's watch, the only inheritance from a man who'd broken his back in the factories, rested against her heart, tucked safely in her coat pocket. 5 Points is no place for a girl alone, her neighbor Mrs. O'Malley had warned the night before. But neither is starving. Clara had nodded, understanding the bitter truth. 3 months since the factory where she'd sewn 12 hours a day had closed its doors. 3 months of watching her savings dissolve like morning mist. The employment agency on Bleecker Street had been her last hope, and when the stern-faced woman behind the desk mentioned a position at the Ashford mansion, Clara had seized it without hesitation. The mansion itself rose before her like something from a fever dream. 5 stories of limestone and marble, with windows that caught the early light and threw it back in fragments of gold. Clara had passed buildings like this before, of course. The wealthy had claimed Fifth Avenue as their kingdom, but she'd never imagined stepping inside one. Wrought iron gates stood open, revealing a circular drive where a fountain carved with cherubs sent water cascading in crystalline arcs. Her hands trembled as she approached the servants' entrance at the side of the building. Not from cold now, but from the weight of what this opportunity meant. $12 a month, room and board. It was more than survival. It was a chance to save, to perhaps one day open the small dress shop she'd dreamed of since childhood. The door swung open before she could knock. A woman in her 50s, dressed in severe black, with keys jangling at her waist, examined Clara with the thoroughness of a jeweler appraising a questionable stone. "You're the new girl!" Her voice carried the crisp efficiency of someone who'd spent decades managing chaos. "I'm Mrs. Harriet Cooper, head housekeeper. You'll address me as Mrs. Cooper. Mr. Ashford demands absolute excellence. Can you provide it?" "Yes, ma'am." Clara met her gaze directly, refusing to let uncertainty show. Mrs. Cooper's expression softened by a fraction. "Then come inside. The staff takes breakfast at 6. You've already missed it. So I'll show you to your quarters and explain your duties. The 3rd floor is your responsibility. The library, Mr. Ashford's private study, and the guest chambers. You'll work from dawn until the rooms are pristine. Understood?" Clara followed her through a maze of corridors that smelled of beeswax and lavender. The servants' quarters occupied the uppermost floor. Small rooms tucked beneath the eaves. Her space contained a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window overlooking the mansion's gardens. Compared to her previous lodgings, a room shared with 3 other women, it felt like luxury. "Mr. Ashford is particular about his privacy," Mrs. Cooper continued, handing Clara a crisp uniform. "He's a brilliant man, built his steel empire from nothing, but the work consumes him. You'll rarely see him, which is for the best. Maintain invisibility, complete your tasks, cause no disturbance. Throughout that first day, Clara learned the invisible choreography of wealth. She discovered that the mansion housed 15 servants, each with precise roles that interlocked like gears in an elaborate machine. She met James, the elderly butler whose posture could shame a military general. She encountered Katie and Rose, two Irish girls who cleaned the lower floors and whispered about the master's legendary temper. She glimpsed the cook, a formidable woman named Mrs. Bernard, who ruled the kitchen with absolute authority. But Thomas Ashford himself remained a mystery, an enigma discussed in hushed tones. The girls spoke of his intensity, his brilliance, his complete devotion to the business that had made him one of New York's wealthiest men at 35. They mentioned his late wife, gone 3 years now, and how grief had transformed him into something harder, colder, more unreachable. Clara's first week passed in a blur of polishing, dusting, and learning to move through rooms as silently as a ghost. The library became her favorite space. Floor-to-ceiling shelves held thousands of volumes, their leather spines embossed with gold. She'd pause sometimes, running her fingers across titles, imagining the worlds contained within pages she'd never have time to read. It was during her second week that everything changed. She'd been cleaning the study, a masculine space dominated by a massive mahogany desk and walls covered with architectural drawings of bridges and buildings. Dawn light filtered through windows overlooking Central Park, still wild and unfinished. Clara was polishing the desk's surface when she noticed the papers scattered across it, blueprints, contracts, letters marked urgent, and beneath them, a leather journal lying open. She shouldn't have looked. Mrs. Cooper's warnings echoed in her mind, but curiosity proved stronger than caution, and her eyes caught a single line written in bold, angular script. Another night without sleep. Another day questioning if any of this matters. The wealth means nothing when you've forgotten how to feel anything beyond the weight of responsibility. The words struck her like a physical blow. Here, in this palace of marble and gold, lived a man drowning in the same emptiness she'd felt in her cramped tenement room. The realization was shocking in its intimacy. She'd glimpsed something not meant for servants' eyes, something raw and human. "What are you doing?" The voice came from the doorway, sharp as broken glass. Clara spun around, her heart launching into her throat. Thomas Ashford stood there, and for a moment she forgot to breathe. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair swept back from a face that could have been carved from the same marble as his mansion. But it was his eyes that held her frozen, grey as storm clouds, intelligent and piercing, currently filled with barely contained fury. "I asked you a question." He moved into the room with the controlled power of a predator. "Were you reading my private correspondence?" "No, sir. I saw words, but I wasn't—" Clara stumbled over her explanation, mortified. "I apologize. It won't happen again." He stopped 3 feet from her, close enough that she could smell the subtle scent of sandalwood and tobacco. His jaw was tight, a muscle jumping beneath the skin, but as he studied her, really looked at her for the first time, something shifted in his expression. The anger didn't disappear, but it was joined by something else. Curiosity, perhaps, or confusion. "What's your name?" The question came quieter than his previous words. "Clara Bennett, sir." "How long have you worked here, Miss Bennett?" 2 weeks, sir." He nodded slowly, his gaze never leaving her face. She felt examined, assessed, as if he were looking past her uniform to something deeper. The moment stretched between them, charged with a tension she couldn't name. Then, just as suddenly as he'd appeared, he stepped back. "Continue with your duties. And Miss Bennett." He paused at the doorway. "In the future, remember that privacy is not a luxury, it's a necessity." "Yes, sir." He left, and Clara released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Her hands shook as she gathered her cleaning supplies. But beneath the fear and embarrassment, something else stirred. She'd seen beyond the mask of the powerful industrialist, had glimpsed the lonely man behind the fortune. And somehow, in that brief encounter, something fundamental had shifted. Neither of them knew it yet, but the careful boundaries between their worlds had just begun to crack. 3 days after their encounter in the study, Clara found an envelope slipped beneath her door. Inside, written on expensive cream stationery, in that same angular script, was a simple message. The library, 8 o'clock this evening. Bring nothing but yourself. T.A. Her first instinct was to refuse. Every rule of the household, every warning from Mrs. Cooper, every lesson learned from living in a world divided by class, screamed that this was dangerous. Masters did not summon servants for innocent reasons. The stories were legion, girls ruined, reputations destroyed, lives shattered by powerful men who viewed them as playthings. But something in those words felt different. There was no command, despite the brevity, no threat, just an invitation that somehow felt like a question. At precisely 8 o'clock, Clara descended the servants' staircase. The household had settled into its evening rhythm. Below stairs, the staff gathered in the kitchen for their meal. Above, the mansion stood quiet, its master typically working late in his study or attending one of the endless social obligations that defined his class. The library door stood ajar, warm light spilling into the hallway. Clara pushed it open slowly. Thomas Ashford stood by the window, hands clasped behind his back, staring out at the city lights beginning to sparkle in the dusk. He'd removed his jacket, and his white shirt was rolled to the elbows, revealing forearms corded with unexpected muscle. When he turned, his expression was unreadable. "Miss Bennet, thank you for coming. I wasn't certain you would. Sir, I don't understand. Please sit." He gestured to one of the leather chairs near the fireplace. When she hesitated, he added, "I give you my word as a gentleman. I mean you no harm." Slowly, Clara lowered herself to the edge of the chair, spine straight, ready to bolt. Thomas took the chair opposite, maintaining a respectful distance. For a long moment, silence filled the space between them. "I owe you an apology," he said finally, "for my behavior the other morning. My anger was disproportionate to your transgression." "No, sir, I was in the wrong. You were doing your job." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "I've been thinking about that moment, about what you must have seen in my journal. The truth is, I haven't had anyone to speak honestly with in—" He paused, searching for words. "A very long time." Clara's heart pounded. This was madness. She should leave. Should run back to the safety of her tiny room. Instead, she heard herself ask, "Why did you summon me here?" His smile was sad, almost self-deprecating. "Because you looked at me in that study, and for one moment, you saw me. Not my money, not my position, just me. And I realized I couldn't remember the last time someone had done that." The honesty in his words struck her like lightning. Clara found herself relaxing slightly, her natural compassion overriding her fear. "It must be lonely," she said softly. "Living in a house full of people who never truly see you." "Yes." The single word carried the weight of years. "Tell me, Miss Bennet, do you read?" The question surprised her. "I do, sir. My father taught me. He believed education was the only true wealth." "A wise man." Thomas rose and moved to the shelves, running his fingers along the spines. "I've collected these books for years, but I rarely have time to discuss them. I wonder, would you do me the honor of borrowing one, reading it, and then perhaps sharing your thoughts?" Clara blinked. "Sir, I'm proposing something unconventional." He pulled a volume from the shelf, Jane Eyre. "Once a week, at this same time, we meet here. You read what I suggest, we discuss it, nothing more. A conversation between two people who find themselves—" unexpectedly curious about each other's minds. Every sensible instinct told her to refuse. But as Clara looked at this powerful man holding out a book like it was treasure, offering her not seduction but dialogue, not possession but partnership, she felt something shift in her chest, a door opening to possibilities she'd never dared imagine. "Why would you risk your reputation for conversations with a servant?" she asked. His eyes met hers with devastating directness. "Because I'm beginning to think reputation is a gilded cage, and you, Miss Bennet, are the first person in years who's made me want to break free." She took the book. That decision changed everything. Over the following weeks, their arrangement blossomed into something extraordinary. Every Thursday at 8 o'clock, Clara descended to the library. They discussed novels, Austen, Bronte, Hawthorne. They debated philosophy. They shared stories of their vastly different lives. Thomas spoke of the brutal competition in the steel industry, the constant pressure to expand, to dominate, to win at any cost. Clara described the resilience of the poor, the small joys found in community, the creativity required simply to survive. The conversations stretched longer each week. 1 hour became 2, then 3. Thomas insisted she call him by his given name when they were alone. Clara found herself laughing at his dry humor, challenging his assumptions, offering perspectives he'd never considered. He, in turn, listened with an attention that felt like being truly seen for the first time in her life, but they weren't careful enough. Mrs. Cooper noticed Clara's late-night absences. Katie mentioned seeing light under the library door at unusual hours. Whispers began circulating among the staff, speculation, concern, and the sharp edge of scandal. It was James, the butler, who finally confronted her. He found Clara on the servants' staircase one evening, heading down for their Thursday meeting. "Miss Bennet." His voice was gentle but firm. "Whatever you think is happening between you and Mr. Ashford, it cannot continue. Men of his class do not befriend girls like you. They use them. And when they're finished, they discard them without a second thought." "It's not like that," Clara protested. "We're just talking. That's how it always begins." James's eyes held genuine worry. "I've served this family for 30 years. I've seen this story before. It never ends well for the girl. Never. Please, for your own sake, end this before it destroys you." His words haunted her. That night, she arrived at the library determined to end their arrangement. Thomas was waiting, a new book in hand, his face lighting up when she entered. The joy in his expression made her heart ache. Clara. He'd taken to using her given name, and the intimacy of it still sent shivers through her. "I've been thinking about our discussion last week regarding social reform. I brought some newspapers with articles about the tenement conditions. I'd value your perspective on—" "Thomas, we need to stop this." The words burst from her before courage failed. "People are talking. Mrs. Cooper suspects something. This is dangerous for both of us, but especially for me." His face paled. "I would never let anything happen to you. You can't protect me from gossip, or from what society will think if this becomes known." She fought to keep her voice steady. "You're a wealthy industrialist. I'm a servant. Those worlds don't mix. They can't mix." Thomas set down the book carefully, his jaw tight. "So you're suggesting we pretend these past weeks meant nothing? That we go back to being strangers, passing in hallways? I'm suggesting we face reality before it crashes down on us." He stood abruptly, pacing to the window. When he turned back, his expression was fierce. "Reality. Let me tell you about reality, Clara. For 3 years, I've been living half a life, going through motions, building an empire that feels increasingly hollow, and then you walked into my study, and for the first time since my wife died, I remembered what it felt like to be truly alive. You make me think. You challenge me." You see past the money and the power to the man underneath. That's not nothing. That's everything. The raw emotion in his voice left her breathless. Thomas, I know the obstacles. I understand the scandal. But I also know this. He moved closer, close enough that she could see gold flecks in his grey eyes. Whatever is growing between us is worth fighting for. Don't you feel it? Clara closed her eyes, battling the truth she'd been denying for weeks. She did feel it. The connection between them had deepened into something far more dangerous than friendship. Somewhere between debates about literature and shared laughter over ridiculous society customs, she'd fallen completely, impossibly in love with a man whose world existed in a different stratosphere from her own. Feeling something doesn't make it possible, she whispered. Then let's make it possible. His voice dropped, urgent and determined. Give me time. Let me figure out how to navigate this. I'm not asking you to risk everything immediately. I'm asking you to trust that what we have is worth pursuing, regardless of obstacles. Before she could respond, footsteps echoed in the hallway. They sprang apart like conspirators caught in treason. The library door swung open, revealing not Mrs. Cooper or James, but someone far more dangerous. Victoria Pemberton swept into the room like a ship in full sail, her emerald dress rustling with each step. Beautiful in the cold, perfect way of old money, she was Thomas's deceased wife's cousin, and, according to household gossip, his intended future bride in the eyes of New York society. Her gaze swept from Thomas to Clara, taking in their proximity, the books scattered around, the guilty tension crackling in the air. Her smile was sharp enough to draw blood. Thomas, darling, I hope I'm not interrupting anything important. Victoria's arrival shattered the fragile sanctuary Thomas and Clara had built. In the days following that confrontation, Clara felt the temperature of the household shift. Mrs. Cooper's instructions became crisper, her supervision tighter. Katie and Rose stopped their friendly chatter when Clara entered a room. Even Mrs. Bernard in the kitchen served her portions with a distinct chill. Victoria had begun visiting the mansion daily. She moved through the halls like she already owned them, supervising arrangements for an upcoming charity gala Thomas was hosting. But Clara knew the real reason for her constant presence. Victoria was marking her territory, making it clear that Thomas Ashford belonged to her world, not to a servant girl with impossible dreams. Their Thursday meetings stopped. Thomas sent no notes, made no attempts at contact. Clara told herself this was for the best, that the clean break was necessary. But at night, alone in her small room, she pressed her father's watch against her chest and tried to silence the ache that threatened to consume her. 2 weeks after Victoria's interruption, Clara was cleaning the second-floor ballroom in preparation for the gala when she overheard voices from the adjacent sitting room. The door stood slightly ajar, and she recognized Thomas's voice immediately. "Victoria, we've discussed this. I have no intention of remarrying." "Don't be absurd." Victoria's laugh was light, but held an edge of steel. "You're 35 years old, Thomas. Your business needs the stability of a proper marriage. Our families have been friends for generations. Catherine would have wanted... Don't presume to know what my wife would have wanted. I know she wouldn't want you wasting your time with inappropriate attachments." Silence stretched so long that Clara thought they'd finished. She should move away, should give them privacy. But her feet remained rooted to the floor. "What are you implying?" Thomas's voice had gone dangerously quiet. "Oh, please. The entire household knows you've been conducting clandestine meetings with that cleaning girl. Clara, isn't it? Really, Thomas, I understand loneliness, but there are limits to acceptable behavior. Choose your next words very carefully, Victoria. I'm not judging you. Men have needs, but surely you understand the difference between a momentary distraction and someone of your own class. Someone who can stand beside you in society. Someone like me." Clara's hands clenched around her dust cloth. The casual cruelty in Victoria's voice, the reduction of everything she and Thomas had shared to mere physical need, made her want to burst through the door and defend what they'd built. But what right did she have? Victoria was correct about society's rules, even if she was devastatingly wrong about Thomas's character. "I think you should leave." Thomas's words came tight with controlled anger. "Think about what I've said. The gala is in 3 days. All of New York will be watching. Make the right choice, Thomas. Announce our engagement. End these foolish rumors before they damage both our reputations." Footsteps approached the door. Clara fled down the hallway, her heart pounding. She made it to the servants' staircase just as Victoria emerged from the sitting room, her expression triumphant. That night, a note appeared under Clara's door. But this time, the handwriting was unfamiliar. Elegant, feminine, poisonous. "You think you matter to him, but you're nothing more than a temporary amusement. Thomas Ashford will marry someone of his own kind. Stay away from him, or I'll ensure you're not only dismissed from this household, but unable to find employment anywhere in New York. I have that power. Don't test me. VP." Clara read the words 3 times, feeling ice settle in her stomach. Victoria wasn't bluffing. Women of her class wielded social connections like weapons, and they knew exactly how to destroy those beneath them. One word in the right ear, and Clara would be marked as trouble, unemployable, possibly forced to resort to desperate measures to survive. She should leave, pack her bag, take her saved wages, and disappear before the situation grew worse. That would be the smart choice, the safe choice. But when she tried to imagine walking away from Thomas, from the way he looked at her like she was something precious, from the conversations that made her feel brilliant and valued, her entire being rebelled against the thought. The next morning, Clara made a decision. If she was going to fight for this, she needed to be smart about it. She needed allies and information. She found James polishing silver in the butler's pantry. The old man looked up as she entered, his expression wary. "Mr. James, I need your help. Miss Bennet, I warned you. I know. And you were right to be concerned. But what's between Thomas and me? It's real. It's worth fighting for. And I think, despite everything, you care about him enough to want him to be happy." James set down the silver serving spoon carefully. "Mr. Ashford has been a different man these past weeks. Lighter somehow. I hadn't seen him smile genuinely since Mrs. Catherine passed. Then help me. Tell me about Victoria Pemberton. Why is she so determined to marry him?" The butler sighed deeply, then gestured for Clara to close the door. When he spoke, his voice was low and confidential. "Miss Pemberton's family fortune has been in decline for years. Her father made poor investments, and they're on the edge of social ruin. A marriage to Mr. Ashford would restore their status and secure their financial future. But it's more than that. She's a woman who believes she deserves power, and Mr. Ashford represents the pinnacle of it. Would he marry her? 3 months ago, I would have said yes. He was lost in grief, and society expected it. But now..." James met Clara's eyes directly. Now he has a reason to resist. The question is whether that reason is strong enough to overcome the obstacles. What obstacles? Mr. Ashford's business partners expect him to maintain certain social standards. A scandal could affect his contracts, his reputation in the industry, and Miss Pemberton isn't the only enemy you'll face. New York society protects its own. They'll unite against any threat to their carefully constructed hierarchies. Clara absorbed this, understanding the magnitude of what they were facing. "So what do I do?" A small smile crossed James's weathered face. "You remind Mr. Ashford who he truly is. The man I've known for 30 years didn't build an empire by backing down from challenges. He fought for everything he has. Perhaps it's time he remembered how to fight for what he wants, not just what's expected." The charity gala arrived with the force of an invading army. The mansion transformed into something from a fairy tale, crystal chandeliers blazing with candlelight. Flowers imported from hothouses, orchestras tuning their instruments in the ballroom. The city's elite would arrive at 8 o'clock, dressed in silks and jewels worth more than most families earned in a lifetime. Clara and the other servants worked frantically to ensure perfection. She moved through rooms she'd cleaned 100 times, but tonight they felt alien, belonging to a world she could never truly enter. Through windows, she glimpsed carriages arriving, depositing women in magnificent gowns and men in elegant evening wear. She caught a single glimpse of Thomas, standing in the receiving line, devastatingly handsome in his formal attire. Victoria stood beside him, her hand possessively on his arm, every inch the future Mrs. Ashford. The sight sent a knife through Clara's chest. At midnight, when the party was in full swing and the servants had retreated below stairs for their own modest meal, Clara slipped away. She'd made a decision, reckless and probably foolish, but she couldn't let the evening end without telling Thomas the truth about her feelings. If he chose Victoria afterward, at least she'd know she'd been brave enough to fight. She changed from her servant's uniform into the only decent dress she owned, a simple blue cotton, worn but clean. Her hands shook as she pinned up her hair. She looked nothing like the glittering guests upstairs, but she would face them anyway. The ballroom sparkled like a treasure chest. Clara slipped in through a side entrance, pressing against the wall, searching the crowd for Thomas's dark head. Music swirled around her, a waltz, elegant and haunting. Hundreds of candles cast everything in golden light. She found him at last, standing near the terrace doors, Victoria still at his side. They were surrounded by a group of industrialists and their wives, discussing business with the casual confidence of people who shaped the world's direction. Thomas's expression was polite but distant, his eyes holding none of the warmth she'd seen in the library. As if sensing her presence, he looked up. Across the crowded ballroom, their eyes met. Everything else fell away. The music faded, the glittering guests disappeared. In that moment, Clara saw everything she needed to know reflected in his face, longing, frustration, and a desperate kind of hope. Thomas excused himself from the group, moving toward her with determined strides. Victoria called his name, but he didn't stop. Clara's heart hammered as he closed the distance between them, completely unconcerned with the curious stares beginning to follow his progress. He stopped before her, so close she could see the pulse beating in his throat. "Clara!" Her name sounded like a prayer. "What are you doing here? I couldn't let tonight end without telling you something." She forced herself to hold his gaze despite every instinct screaming at her to flee. "I love you, Thomas. I know it's impossible. I know every rule of society stands between us. But I needed you to know that what we shared in the library wasn't nothing. It was everything to me." The confession hung in the air between them like something fragile and precious. Thomas's eyes blazed with emotion. He reached for her hand, uncaring that 100 pairs of eyes were now fixed on them. "Then marry me." The words detonated like dynamite. Clara felt the floor tilt beneath her feet. "What?" "Marry me," he repeated louder now, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent ballroom. "I don't care about scandal. I don't care about society's rules. I've spent 3 years living half a life. And then you walked into it and reminded me what it means to actually feel something. I love you, Clara Bennett, and I'm done pretending that anything else matters." The ballroom erupted. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Victoria's face transformed into a mask of fury. But Clara heard none of it. She heard only the pounding of her own heart and the ringing truth in Thomas's words. "Yes," she whispered. Then louder for everyone to hear, "Yes!" Thomas pulled her into his arms, and right there, in front of New York's entire elite, he kissed her, It was a claiming, a declaration, a line drawn in sand that could never be uncrossed. When they finally broke apart, the ballroom had divided. Half the guests wore expressions of shock and disapproval. The other half looked intrigued, even admiring, but Victoria Pemberton's face held something far more dangerous, cold, calculated rage. She glided forward, her voice carrying clearly, "How touching! Thomas, surely you don't mean to actually go through with this farce?" "Every word," he said firmly, keeping Clara's hand clasped in his. "Then you're a fool." Victoria's mask of civility cracked completely. "You think she loves you. She's a servant, Thomas. She saw an opportunity to climb out of poverty and she took it. This has nothing to do with love and everything to do with money." "That's not true," Clara protested. "Isn't it? Tell everyone here, if Thomas were penniless, would you still want him? If he had nothing to offer but his name?" The question was designed to humiliate, to cast doubt, to plant poison. But Clara met Victoria's glare without flinching. "I fell in love with Thomas in a library, discussing books. Not his bank accounts, not his mansion, the man who listened to my opinions, who valued my thoughts, who saw me as an equal despite every difference between us. So yes, I would love him penniless. I would love him in rags. Because what we have has nothing to do with wealth and everything to do with seeing each other's souls." Her words rang through the ballroom with perfect clarity. Several women in the crowd nodded subtly. Even some of the men looked moved, but Victoria wasn't finished. "How noble! But love doesn't pay bills, Miss Bennet. And Thomas's business associates won't accept a servant as his wife. They'll turn on him. His contracts will evaporate. His empire will crumble. Is your pride worth destroying everything he's built?" The threat was clear and devastating. Clara felt Thomas tense beside her. This was the real battle, not winning his heart, but protecting everything he'd worked for. Victoria had found the perfect weapon, and now she wielded it with surgical precision. Thomas's business partner, a heavy-set man named Cornelius Morrison, stepped forward. "Thomas, I must counsel prudence. Our investors, they expect certain standards. This kind of scandal could have significant repercussions." Another voice joined in, Jonathan Blackwood, who controlled half the rail contracts in the Northeast. "Morrison is right. I've got shareholders to answer to. They won't understand this kind of unconventional arrangement." Clara felt the walls closing in. This was what she'd feared from the beginning. The weight of society's expectations, the power of established connections, the cold calculation of business interests. How could love possibly stand against all that? But Thomas's expression had transformed into something fierce and uncompromising. The industrialist who'd built an empire from nothing stood before them now, and he was done being diplomatic. "Gentlemen, let me make something abundantly clear." His voice carried the steel that had made him one of New York's most formidable businessmen. "I didn't build my fortune by bowing to other people's expectations. I built it through innovation, hard work, and refusing to accept limitations. If your investors have a problem with who I choose to marry, they're welcome to take their business elsewhere. I'll survive. The question is whether you will." The threat was subtle, but unmistakable. Thomas Ashford controlled patents, rail routes, and manufacturing processes that his competitors desperately needed. Crossing him would cost them far more than it would cost him. Morrison's face reddened. "You're bluffing. Try me." Thomas's smile was dangerous. "I'll make this very simple. Clara Bennet is going to be my wife. Anyone who has a problem with that can exit my home immediately. Those who can accept it, who can see past outdated class restrictions to recognize genuine connection, are welcome to stay and celebrate with us." The silence that followed felt endless. Clara held her breath, waiting for the exodus, the rejection, the proof that love couldn't possibly win against such overwhelming odds. Then, from the back of the ballroom, An elderly woman in magnificent diamonds stepped forward. Clara recognized her from newspapers, Mrs. Caroline Astor, the undisputed queen of New York society. If she rejected the match, everyone else would follow. It would be social death. Mrs. Astor moved slowly through the parting crowd, her shrewd eyes assessing Clara with uncomfortable intensity. When she reached them, she looked at Thomas first. Your wife, Catherine, was a dear friend. She would have wanted you to find happiness again. Then she turned to Clara. Young woman, do you understand what you're taking on? The gossip will be merciless. Society will test you at every turn. You'll need courage, grace, and an iron will. Clara lifted her chin. I grew up in 5 Points, ma'am. I've survived poverty, factory work, and situations that would make society ladies faint. I'm not afraid of gossip or tests. I'm only afraid of letting fear prevent me from loving the man I was meant to find. A smile, small but genuine, crossed Mrs. Astor's face. Catherine always said Thomas needed someone strong enough to match him. Perhaps she was right. She extended her hand to Clara. Welcome to New York society. My dear, I suspect you'll shake it to its foundations. The gesture broke the dam. If Caroline Astor accepted the match, others would follow. Slowly, grudgingly, but follow they would. Women began whispering among themselves, their expressions shifting from shock to curiosity. Men who'd stood beside Morrison and Blackwood suddenly found reasons to congratulate Thomas on his engagement. Victoria stood frozen, her carefully constructed plans crumbling around her. Her face had gone white, then red, cycling through emotions too quickly to track. When she finally found her voice, it emerged as a hiss. This isn't over, Thomas. You're making the biggest mistake of your life. No, he said quietly, his arm tightening around Clara's waist. The biggest mistake of my life was wasting 3 years trying to be what everyone else expected. That ends tonight. Victoria swept from the ballroom, her exit dramatic and final. A few families followed her, old money clinging to outdated standards, but most remained. The orchestra, which had stopped playing during the confrontation, resumed. Couples returned to the dance floor. Though conversations buzzed with the night's scandal, Thomas pulled Clara onto the terrace, away from curious eyes. The November air was cold, but she barely felt it. Adrenaline still sang through her veins, making everything feel sharp and impossibly real. "Did that actually just happen?" she whispered. It did. Thomas cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs tracing her cheekbones. "I meant every word. I love you, Clara. I'm going to marry you, and we're going to build a life together that defies every expectation. What about your business? Morrison and Blackwood will fall in line or find themselves at a severe disadvantage. I didn't exaggerate my position. I control too many critical assets for them to risk my displeasure." He smiled, but it faded quickly. "But Clara, Victoria was right about one thing. This will be difficult. Society will test us. There will be people who never accept you, who will try to undermine us at every turn." "I know." She leaned into his touch. "I grew up fighting for survival. I'm not afraid of fighting for love. Then we fight together." He kissed her forehead, gentle and reverent. "Tomorrow, we'll begin planning the wedding. Small, intimate, just us and the people who matter. And after that, we'll show New York exactly what's possible when two people refuse to accept limitations." They stood there on the terrace, wrapped in each other's arms, while inside the ballroom the music played on. The night had transformed from a celebration of wealth into something far more precious, a declaration of love that had shaken society's foundations. But neither of them saw the figure watching from the garden shadows. Victoria Pemberton hadn't left after all. She'd merely retreated to plan her revenge, and as she watched Thomas and Clara together, Her expression promised that this battle was far from over. If she couldn't have Thomas Ashford, she would make certain that no one else could either. If you're enjoying this love story that's breaking all the rules, hit that like button. Let me know you're rooting for Clara and Thomas as they face what comes next. The morning after the gala, Clara woke in her small servant's room and wondered if she'd dreamed the entire evening, but the bruise on her hand from Thomas, squeezing it so tightly during their confrontation with Victoria, told her everything had been devastatingly real. She expected chaos. What she got was silence. When she descended to the kitchen for breakfast, the other servants stopped talking. Mrs. Cooper entered, her expression unreadable, and gestured for Clara to follow her to the housekeeper's office. "Miss Bennet." The older woman closed the door carefully. "Mr. Ashford has given instructions regarding your new status in this household. You're to be moved to the guest wing immediately. He's hired a lady's maid to assist you, and a seamstress will arrive this afternoon to begin your wedding trousseau." Clara sank into a chair, overwhelmed. "Mrs. Cooper, I never meant to disrupt." "Hush, child." To Clara's shock, the housekeeper's stern expression softened into something almost maternal. "I've watched Mr. Ashford for 3 years, moving through this house like a ghost. You brought him back to life. Some might call it scandal. I call it a miracle." She paused, then added quietly, "But you should know that not everyone shares my view. There will be challenges ahead, staff who resent your elevation, society members who will try to humiliate you. You'll need to be stronger than steel." "I will be," Clara promised. Over the following days, her world transformed with dizzying speed. The guest room she was given occupied the second floor, with windows overlooking the garden. It contained a 4-poster bed, a writing desk, and more space than she'd ever had in her entire life. Marie, her new lady's maid, was a Frenchwoman in her 40s who treated Clara with professional respect that felt surreal after years of being invisible. The seamstress, Mrs. Wellington, arrived with fabrics and fashion plates. She measured Clara for gowns, day dresses, evening wear, and a wedding dress that would be simple but elegant, cream silk with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. Clara stood on the fitting platform, watching herself transform in the mirror, and tried to recognize the woman staring back. Thomas spent every available moment with her. He took her to his lawyer to discuss a prenuptial agreement, which he insisted would protect her interests, not his. He brought her to his business offices downtown, introducing her to managers and clerks who struggled to hide their shock. He taught her about his empire, explaining steel production, railroad contracts, and bridge construction with the same patience he'd shown discussing literature in the library. "I want you to understand my world," he told her one afternoon in his study. "Not because you need to manage it, but because we're partners. Everything I have, I want you to share." But not everyone was welcoming. 3 days after the gala, Clara received her first anonymous letter, slipped under her door in an envelope with no return address. The message inside was brief and brutal. "Gold-digging whore, you'll never be one of us. We'll make sure you regret climbing above your station." She showed it to Thomas, who read it with barely contained rage. "I'll hire security." No. Clara took the letter back, folding it carefully. "If I hide from every cruel word, I'll spend my life in fear. These people want to intimidate me. I won't give them that satisfaction." More letters followed, 5 in the first week, 10 in the second. Some were merely insulting, others were graphic in their threats. Clara read each one, felt the sting of their hatred, then filed them away. She refused to let anonymous cowards steal her happiness. But the public confrontations were harder to dismiss. She was shopping on Fifth Avenue with Marie when she encountered her first open hostility. A group of society women, including 2 who'd attended the gala, were exiting a boutique as Clara approached. Their leader, Mrs. Arabella Hartford, known for her vicious tongue, stepped directly into Clara's path. Well, well, if it isn't the new Mrs. Ashford, or should I say, the former cleaning girl playing dress-up. Clara's hands clenched, but she kept her voice steady. Good afternoon, Mrs. Hartford. Don't good afternoon me, you presumptuous little climber. You think wearing expensive clothes makes you one of us? You think marrying money erases what you are? She leaned closer, her perfume cloying. You're nothing but a servant with delusions of grandeur. And when Thomas Ashford tires of you, and he will, you'll find yourself right back in the gutter where you belong. The other women tittered behind their gloved hands. Marie started to protest, but Clara touched her arm, silencing her. She looked Mrs. Hartford directly in the eye and smiled. You're absolutely right, ma'am. I am nothing but a servant. I've scrubbed floors, washed dishes, and worked 12-hour days in factories. I know exactly what I am. The question is, do you know what you are? A woman so insecure in her own worth that she needs to tear down someone else to feel superior. I may have come from poverty, but at least I earned everything I have through honest work. Can you say the same? Or did you simply have the good fortune to be born into privilege? Mrs. Hartford's face turned purple. How dare you? I dare, because I have nothing to lose. You can't take away what I never had. But Thomas Ashford chose me, not because of my pedigree or my connections, but because of who I am. That must burn, knowing that a servant won something you and women like you couldn't buy with all your inherited wealth. Clara walked past them, head high, heart pounding. Behind her she heard stunned silence, then furious whispers. Marie hurried to catch up, her eyes wide with admiration. Mademoiselle, that was magnificent. But Clara's hands shook as they continued down the street. Standing up to bullies felt powerful in the moment, but she knew she'd just made enemies who would spend years trying to destroy her reputation. The incident reached Thomas within hours. He found her in the library that evening, reading by the fire, and pulled her into his arms. Marie told me what happened. Clara, I'm so sorry. Don't apologize for other people's cruelty. She leaned against his chest, drawing strength from his solid presence. I knew this would be hard. I just didn't realize how much it would hurt, having strangers hate me for daring to love you. They don't hate you. They fear you. Thomas tilted her chin up. You represent change, the possibility that their carefully controlled world isn't as fixed as they believed. That terrifies them. Does it terrify you? Sometimes I wonder if you've truly considered what you're giving up, your social standing, your business relationships, the life you knew. I'm not giving up anything that matters. His voice was fierce. And I'm gaining everything I need. You, Clara, your courage, your intelligence, your stubborn refusal to be diminished. That's worth more than 1,000 society invitations. They were married 3 weeks after the gala, in a private ceremony at City Hall. Mrs. Astor attended, along with James, Mrs. Cooper, and a handful of Thomas's business associates who'd proven themselves true friends. The ceremony was simple, the vows traditional, but when Thomas slipped the ring onto Clara's finger, a band of gold set with a single perfect diamond, she felt the weight of commitment settle over her like a blessing. I love you, he whispered as they were pronounced husband and wife. Every day for the rest of our lives, I'll prove it. They honeymooned at Thomas's country estate in the Hudson Valley, a sprawling property overlooking the river. For 2 weeks, they existed in a bubble of happiness, far from the gossip and judgment of the city. They walked through autumn woods, discussed plans for their future, and learned each other in ways both profound and intimate. But the bubble had to burst eventually. They returned to New York to face the consequences of their choices. Victoria's revenge arrived in the form of a coordinated assault. She'd spent the weeks during their honeymoon carefully building a coalition of Thomas's enemies, business rivals who resented his success, society members who felt betrayed by his unconventional marriage, and old money families who saw Clara as a threat to their carefully preserved hierarchy. The first blow came when 3 of Thomas's major contracts were suddenly cancelled. Railroad companies that had relied on his steel found alternative suppliers. Bridge projects he'd been guaranteed suddenly went to competitors. Within a week, he'd lost over $200,000 in revenue. The second blow was social. Invitations that had once flooded the mansion dried up completely. Events Thomas had attended for years suddenly had limited capacity. Clara found herself excluded from charitable committees, shopping establishments, even churches. The elite had closed ranks and the message was clear: accept your exile or we'll destroy everything you've built. Thomas met with his business partners in his study, and Clara listened from the library next door as voices rose in heated debate. "You have to do something, Ashford," Morrison's voice carried clearly. "We're hemorrhaging contracts. If this continues, we'll be bankrupt within 6 months. I won't divorce her." Thomas's response was immediate and absolute. "That's not open for discussion." "Then what do you propose?" Blackwood demanded. "Your wife's presence is costing us millions. The investors won't stand for it. They want her gone, Thomas. One way or another." Clara pressed her hand against her mouth, fighting tears. This was exactly what Victoria had promised, the slow, methodical destruction of everything Thomas had worked for. And it was happening because of her. That night she found Thomas alone on the terrace, staring at the city lights. His shoulders were tight with tension, his jaw clenched. When she touched his arm, he turned to her with eyes that held exhaustion and determination in equal measure. "I'm losing everything," he said quietly. "My contracts, my reputation, my standing in the business community. Victoria has turned every enemy I've ever made against us. Then let me go." The words tore from Clara's throat. "Annul the marriage. Tell society it was a mistake. I'll disappear and you can rebuild." "Stop!" Thomas gripped her shoulders. "Don't even suggest it. I would rather lose every dollar, every contract, every business connection than spend one day without you. This empire means nothing if I'm alone in it. But your work, everything you've built, can be rebuilt. But you, Clara, are irreplaceable." He pulled her close. "We're going to fight this, not by backing down, but by showing them we're stronger than their hatred. I have assets they don't know about, patents they can't access, and a determination they've underestimated. What are you planning?" A slow smile crossed his face, dangerous and calculated. "Victoria thinks she's won by turning my competitors against me. She thinks losing a few contracts will break me, but she's forgotten who she's dealing with. I didn't build this empire by playing it safe. It's time to remind everyone why they should never underestimate Thomas Ashford." He led her back inside, to his study, where he spread blueprints across his desk. "I've been developing something revolutionary, a new steel alloy that's stronger, lighter, and cheaper to produce than anything currently on the market. I've kept it secret, waiting for the right moment to unveil it. That moment is now." Clara studied the technical drawings, not understanding the specifics, but recognizing the passion in Thomas's voice. "How will this help?" "Because every railroad, every bridge project, every building contractor in America will need this steel. I'll control the patents, the production, everything. Those who cancelled my contracts will come crawling back, begging for access, and when they do, I'll dictate the terms." "That's brilliant." Clara felt hope kindle in her chest. "But what about the social exile? Victoria's convinced society to shut us out completely. Then we'll build our own society." Thomas's eyes gleamed. "We'll host events for the new money, industrialists, inventors, entrepreneurs who've built their fortunes through work rather than inheritance. We'll create a salon for artists, writers, intellectuals. We'll show old New York that their approval isn't necessary for success or happiness." Over the following weeks, Thomas worked with almost manic intensity. He filed patents, negotiated with manufacturers, and began producing his revolutionary steel. Clara, meanwhile, sent invitations to every person they knew who'd been excluded by old society, immigrants who'd become wealthy through innovation, women who'd started businesses, artists and writers who existed on the margins of respectability. Their first salon gathered 30 people in the mansion's ballroom. They discussed literature, science, business, and social reform with an energy that old society gatherings never possessed. Clara found herself surrounded by brilliant minds who valued ideas over pedigree, and for the first time since the gala, she felt she'd found her place. But Victoria wasn't finished. One evening, as Clara returned from visiting a charitable organization in 5 Points, she'd begun working with the poor. Using Thomas's resources to fund education programs, she found her husband's face ashen. "What's wrong?" He handed her a newspaper. The headline screamed, "Steel Magnet's Secret Past, Ashford Empire Built on Stolen Patents." The article, clearly planted by Victoria and her allies, accused Thomas of having stolen the designs for his original steel processes from a deceased partner. It provided just enough detail to seem credible, just enough innuendo to plant doubt. If the allegations stuck, his business would be destroyed, his reputation ruined beyond repair. Clara read the article twice, feeling fury build in her chest. This is libel, pure invention. It doesn't matter if it's true. The damage is done. Thomas's voice was hollow. Business is built on trust. Once that's questioned, contracts evaporate. Morrison called an emergency meeting. The board wants me to step down until this is resolved. No. Clara set the newspaper down with careful precision. We're not going to let Victoria win. If she's willing to lie, we'll fight her with truth. Thomas, you keep records of everything, correct? Contracts, correspondence, patent applications. Of course, but then we prove her wrong. Publicly, decisively, in a way that not only clears your name, but exposes her manipulation. Clara's mind raced, pieces falling into place. We call a press conference. We provide documentation proving the accusations false, and we don't just defend, we go on the offensive. We reveal how Victoria and her allies have been systematically trying to destroy us because we dared to marry outside our classes. Thomas stared at her, hope beginning to dawn in his eyes. That could work, but it's risky. We'd be openly declaring war on some of the most powerful families in New York. They declared war on us the moment we fell in love. Clara took his hands. I'm tired of defending. It's time to show them what happens when they underestimate a girl from 5 Points and the man who chose to love her. The press conference took place in the grand ballroom of the Waldorf Hotel, carefully chosen for its public accessibility. Thomas had invited every major newspaper in New York, every business journal, and every society columnist. The room filled quickly, reporters hungry for scandal, business leaders curious about the allegations, and society figures drawn by the promise of drama. Victoria Pemberton sat in the third row, her expression serene, confident in her victory. She'd orchestrated this scandal perfectly, planting seeds of doubt that would be impossible to fully eradicate. Even if Thomas proved his innocence, the stain of accusation would linger. That's how reputation worked in their world. What she hadn't anticipated was Clara. Thomas stood at the podium, Clara beside him, and began methodically dismantling every accusation. He presented contracts signed and notarized years before his supposed partner's death. He showed patent applications submitted with detailed technical drawings in his own hand. He provided testimony from engineers, lawyers, and business associates confirming his innovative work. The evidence was overwhelming, incontrovertible. The stolen patent story crumbled under the weight of documentation. But then Clara stepped forward. Ladies and gentlemen, my husband has proven his innocence, but that's not why we called this conference. Her voice rang clear and strong through the ballroom. We're here to expose a coordinated campaign of destruction, orchestrated by individuals who believe their social status places them above honesty, integrity, or basic human decency. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Victoria's serene expression began to crack. Clara continued, pulling documents from a folder. These are letters sent anonymously to my husband's business partners, clients, and associates, making false accusations about his character, his business practices, and his marriage. We've traced them to a single source. She met Victoria's gaze directly. Miss Victoria Pemberton, who has spent the past 2 months systematically trying to destroy us because Mr. Ashford refused her proposal of marriage. The murmur became a roar. Reporters began scribbling frantically. Victoria stood, her face flushing crimson. This is absurd. I would never. You would, and you did. Thomas stepped forward, his voice cutting through the noise. We have testimony from your own household staff, obtained through legal means, describing how you dictated these letters. We have cancelled contracts traced back to meetings you arranged. We have everything, Victoria, every piece of evidence needed to prove you've engaged in deliberate sabotage. You can't prove anything. Victoria's composure shattered completely. Your servant wife has obviously manipulated you, Thomas. This is exactly what women like her do. They sink their claws into wealthy men and turn them against their own kind. My own kind. Thomas's laugh was harsh. You mean people who measure worth by inheritance rather than character? People who would rather destroy someone than see them happy outside predetermined social boundaries. If that's my kind, Victoria, I want no part of it. Clara spoke again, her voice steady despite the chaos. This press conference isn't just about clearing Mr. Ashford's name. It's about exposing a system that allows people like Miss Pemberton to wield social connections as weapons. A system that values pedigree over merit, appearance over substance, and conformity over genuine human connection. She turned to address the entire room. I was born in poverty. I worked as a factory girl and a servant. By society's standards, I have no right to stand here. But I've learned something that old money seems to have forgotten. True worth isn't inherited. It's earned through kindness, integrity, and the courage to love someone regardless of what the world thinks. The ballroom had gone silent. Every eye was fixed on Clara. This woman who'd started as a cleaning girl and now stood before New York's elite, refusing to be diminished. My husband built his empire through innovation and hard work. He employs thousands of people, creates products that build cities, and contributes more to this country's progress than 100 social clubs combined. If you reject him because he married me, you're not protecting society's standards. You're revealing your own insecurity and fear of change. She paused, letting her words sink in. The world is changing. The old hierarchies are crumbling. You can either evolve with it, or you can cling to outdated prejudices and find yourselves increasingly irrelevant. The choice is yours. The silence stretched for 3 heartbeats. Then, from the back of the room, someone began to clap. Clara recognized him, Marcus Chen, a Chinese immigrant who'd become one of New York's most successful importers. Others joined him. Within moments, half the room was applauding. Victoria stood frozen, her carefully constructed facade in ruins. She'd been publicly exposed, her schemes laid bare before the very society she'd tried to weaponize. Without another word, she fled from the ballroom, her footsteps echoing in the sudden hush that followed her exit. The press conference concluded with a final statement from Thomas. We're announcing the formation of a new business coalition, the Merit Society, open to any industrialist, entrepreneur, or innovator regardless of social background. We'll be working together to create opportunities, fund education, and prove that worth is determined by what you build, not what you inherit. The announcement sparked immediate interest. By the time they left the hotel, Thomas had commitments from 20 prominent businessmen, all eager to join an organization that valued accomplishment over pedigree. The next days brought seismic shifts in New York's social landscape. The major newspapers ran stories praising Clara's speech and condemning Victoria's actions. Business contracts that had been cancelled were quietly reinstated. Invitations began arriving again, not from old society, but from the new guard, the rising class of self-made men and women who saw in Thomas and Clara's story a reflection of their own struggles. Mrs. Astor herself sent a note, brief but significant. "You've done something I thought impossible. You've made society question itself. Well done, my dear. History will remember you." Victoria Pemberton disappeared from public life. Rumors suggested her family had sent her to their estate in Newport to avoid further scandal. The few society members who'd stood firmly with her found themselves increasingly isolated, clinging to relevance in a world that was rapidly moving past them. But the true victory came 2 months later, when Clara discovered she was pregnant. They were in the library, their library where everything had begun, when she told him. Thomas's reaction was pure joy, lifting her and spinning her around before gently setting her down and placing his hand reverently on her still flat stomach. "A child," he whispered. "Our child. Clara, do you realize what this means? That I'm going to be exhausted for 9 months." He laughed, then grew serious. "It means we're creating a future that isn't bound by the past. Our child will grow up in a world where love matters more than lineage, where character matters more than class. We're building that world, one day at a time." Clara leaned against him, feeling the steady beat of his heart. "I'm terrified. What if I'm not a good mother? What if our child faces the same prejudice we've encountered? Then we'll teach them what you taught me, that courage isn't the absence of fear, it's moving forward despite it. Our child will be strong because they'll have you as a mother. They'll be compassionate because they'll understand what it means to fight for love, and they'll change the world, just like you did." The pregnancy brought unexpected allies, women who'd been excluded by old society. Actresses, artists, businesswomen rallied around Clara. They formed a support network, sharing advice and resources. Even some of the old guard, particularly younger members who'd chafed against rigid social rules, began quietly attending the Merit Society events. Thomas's business flourished beyond even his optimistic projections. The new steel alloy revolutionized construction, and his patents made him even wealthier than before. But more importantly, he'd built something that couldn't be measured in dollars, a coalition of innovators who were reshaping America's industrial landscape. Clara used her position to fund education programs in 5 Points and other immigrant neighborhoods. She established trade schools where young women could learn skills beyond domestic service. She spoke at suffrage rallies, advocating for women's rights with the same fierce passion she'd shown at the press conference. Their salon became legendary. Every Thursday evening, the mansion filled with artists, writers, inventors, and social reformers. Conversations sparked collaborations that launched businesses, inspired novels, and influenced policy. The line between classes blurred in those rooms, replaced by genuine exchange of ideas. On a spring evening, 6 months after the press conference, Clara and Thomas hosted a celebration for the Merit Society's first major achievement. They'd successfully lobbied for improved working conditions in New York's factories, including reduced hours and better safety standards. The victory had required months of effort, countless meetings, and the combined political pressure of their entire coalition. As Clara stood in the ballroom, her pregnancy now visible, watching their friends celebrate, she felt Thomas's arms wrap around her from behind. "Tired," he murmured against her hair. "Exhausted, happy, terrified, hopeful." She laughed. all of it at once. That's called living, my love. He turned her gently to face him. A year ago, I was a ghost in my own life, going through motions. Now look at us. We've built something real, something meaningful, and it all started because a brave young woman agreed to meet me in a library. I think it started because a lonely man saw past my uniform to who I actually was. Clara touched his face. You saved me, Thomas. From poverty, yes. But more than that, from believing I had to accept the limitations the world placed on me. We saved each other. He kissed her softly. And now we're going to raise a child who never has to choose between love and security, between following their heart and following expectations. That's our legacy. The evening continued around them. Laughter, music, conversation that crackled with energy and possibility. Outside the mansion, New York hummed with its usual chaos. But inside these walls, in the home they'd built together, a new world was taking shape. It wouldn't be easy. There would always be people who judged them, who clung to old prejudices, who resented the changes they represented. But Clara and Thomas had proven something fundamental. Love backed by courage could move mountains. It could shatter social barriers, rewrite rules, and create futures that seemed impossible. As midnight approached and guests began departing, Clara caught sight of Mrs. Cooper supervising the cleanup. The housekeeper met her eyes and smiled, a genuine, warm expression that spoke volumes about how far they'd all traveled. James appeared with their coats, his elderly face creased with pride. Another successful evening, Mr. and Mrs. Ashford. Your home has become quite the center of progress. Our home, Clara corrected gently. All of us together, building something new. Later, alone in their bedroom, Clara stood at the window overlooking the garden. Thomas joined her, wrapping his arms around her expanding waist. Do you have regrets? He asked quietly. About how hard this has been, the battles we've fought. Clara considered the question seriously. She thought about the anonymous letters, the public humiliation, the constant scrutiny. She thought about Victoria's hatred, society's rejection, the painful process of carving out a place in a world determined to exclude her. Then she thought about Thursday evenings in the library, where everything had begun. She thought about Thomas's unwavering support, the friends they'd made, the causes they'd championed. She thought about the life growing inside her and the future they were creating together. Not for a single moment, she said firmly. Every challenge made us stronger. Every battle proved we were right to fight. We didn't just win our love, Thomas. We changed the rules for everyone who comes after us. He kissed the top of her head, and they stood together in comfortable silence, watching moonlight paint silver patterns across the garden. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, a business to run, a coalition to lead, a child to prepare for, but tonight they had this moment of perfect peace. The story of the cleaning girl who married a millionaire would be told and retold in years to come. Some would romanticize it, others would criticize it, but everyone would remember it. Because Clara and Thomas hadn't just fallen in love, they dared to demand that love be enough, and in doing so, they'd cracked open a door for countless others who dreamed of crossing boundaries that had once seemed insurmountable. Their greatest victory wasn't defeating Victoria or building business success. It was proving that human connection transcends every artificial barrier society erects. That courage and integrity matter more than pedigree. That love, when backed by unwavering commitment, can indeed conquer all. As Clara drifted towards sleep that night, Thomas's arms secure around her, she felt profound gratitude. Not just for the wealth and comfort she now enjoyed, but for something far more precious, the freedom to love authentically, to live boldly, and to build a future where their child would never have to choose between their heart and their circumstances. The Gilded Age was changing, and they'd helped change it. 8 years later, the mansion on Fifth Avenue had evolved along with its inhabitants. The formal parlors now housed bookshelves accessible to anyone who visited. The ballroom hosted not just galas, but lectures, art exhibitions, and meetings of various reform societies. The gardens contained a playground where neighborhood children, regardless of their parents' social status, came to play. Clara stood in that garden now, watching her daughter Catherine chase her younger brother Henry through the flower beds. At 7 years old, Catherine had inherited her mother's auburn hair and her father's sharp intelligence. She moved between worlds with an ease that still sometimes astonished Clara, equally comfortable discussing literature with visiting writers or playing with children from 5 Points. Henry, at 4, possessed his father's determination and his mother's compassionate heart. He'd recently announced his intention to become an inventor, so he could build things that help people. Thomas had immediately commissioned a small workshop in the carriage house, complete with tools scaled to a child's hands. "They're happy," a voice said behind her. Clara turned to find Mrs. Cooper, now retired but still a frequent visitor, standing at the garden entrance. The older woman had aged gracefully, her stern demeanor softened by years of watching love triumph over adversity. "They are," Clara agreed. "Sometimes I worry they don't understand how unusual their childhood is, how rare it is to have this kind of freedom. They'll understand when they're older. For now, let them be children." Mrs. Cooper smiled. "Have you heard the latest news about Victoria Pemberton?" Clara raised an eyebrow. "Should I want to? She's engaged to a minor nobleman from England, quite penniless. Apparently she's settled for a title since she couldn't have the fortune she wanted." "I hope she finds happiness," Clara said, meaning it. The anger and hurt had faded years ago, replaced by something closer to pity. Victoria had spent her life pursuing status and ended up with neither love nor joy. Thomas emerged from the house, carrying documents that likely pertained to his latest project, funding education for immigrant children throughout New York. At 43, he'd only grown more handsome, his hair touched with distinguished grey at the temples. But more than that, he'd grown as a person. The driven industrialist had learned to balance ambition with compassion, success with service. He kissed Clara softly when he reached her, a greeting that still sent warmth through her chest after 8 years of marriage. "The City Council approved our proposal," he announced. 5 new schools in immigrant neighborhoods, fully funded by the Merit Society. "We did it, Clara." She squeezed his hand. "You mean we all did it? This is what happens when people choose cooperation over competition." Catherine ran up, breathless and grass-stained. "Papa! Mama! Henry says he's going to invent flying machines. Tell him that's silly." Thomas lifted his daughter into his arms. "Silly? The Wright brothers would disagree. Why shouldn't your brother dream of flying machines?" "Because I want to invent them first," Catherine declared. "I'm older, so I should get to invent the important things." Clara and Thomas exchanged amused glances. Their daughter had clearly inherited her mother's competitive spirit along with her father's ambition. "Perhaps you could work together," Clara suggested. "Imagine what you could accomplish as a team." Later that evening, after the children were in bed, Clara and Thomas hosted a small dinner for their closest friends. Marcus Chen and his wife attended, along with several other Merit Society members. Mrs. Astor even made an appearance, her presence a reminder that old society and new had found ways to coexist, if not always harmoniously. During dessert, Marcus raised his glass. A toast to Thomas and Clara Ashford, who proved that love and principle can overcome any obstacle. Your marriage didn't just unite 2 people, it sparked a movement that's transformed New York. "Hear, hear," the others joined in. Thomas stood, his hand finding Clara's. "The real toast belongs to my wife. 8 years ago, she walked into my study to clean and ended up cleaning out every false belief I'd held about worth, class, and what truly matters. Everything we've accomplished started with her courage. Clara rose beside him, her throat tight with emotion. And everything I've accomplished started with a man who saw past my uniform to who I actually was, who taught me that circumstances don't define us, our choices do. She looked around the table at faces that had become family, not through blood, but through shared values and mutual respect. This was the world they'd built together, not perfect, but infinitely better than what came before. We've proven something important, she continued, that the boundaries between people are artificial, that connection transcends class, that love breaks down barriers, and that courage, real courage, is choosing authenticity over acceptance. After the guests departed, Clara and Thomas stood once more in their library, the room where it had all begun. Moonlight streamed through windows, illuminating shelves packed with books they'd read together, discussed together, used as bridges between their vastly different worlds. "Do you ever miss the simplicity of those first conversations?" Clara asked. "Before everything became so complicated?" "Never." Thomas pulled her close. "Those conversations were beautiful because they were beginning something. But what we have now, this life, these children, this community we've built, that's the fulfillment of everything those conversations promised." He was right, Clara realized. They'd started with words in a library, two lonely people finding unexpected connection. But they'd built something far greater, a partnership that had transformed not just their own lives, but the lives of countless others who'd been inspired by their example. The girl from 5 Points who cleaned a mansion had become a woman who reshaped society. The isolated industrialist had become a leader in social reform. Together, they'd proven that love, backed by courage and principle, could indeed change the world. As they climbed the stairs to their bedroom, passing portraits that included not just ancestors, but friends they'd made along the way, Clara felt the satisfying weight of a life well lived. There were still challenges ahead, there always would be. But they'd face them together, just as they'd faced everything else. Their story would endure, not as a fairy tale, but as something more valuable, proof that authentic love combined with unwavering integrity can overcome any obstacle, that human connection transcends artificial boundaries, that the courage to follow your heart, regardless of consequences, is the most revolutionary act of all. And in that library where two worlds had collided and merged, where a cleaning girl and a millionaire had discovered they were simply two people who recognized each other's souls, their legacy continued to inspire everyone who heard their story. Love had won. Not easily, not without cost, but absolutely and completely, and that victory echoed through every life they touched, every barrier they helped break down, every person who dared to dream impossible dreams, because Clara and Thomas had proven those dreams could become reality. This is the power of love that refuses to accept limitations. Comment below what moved you most about Clara and Thomas's journey, and don't forget to watch the next incredible love story appearing on your screen now. The story of Clara Bennett and Thomas Ashford reminds us that true love recognizes no boundaries. It sees past wealth and poverty, status and circumstance, to the essential humanity we all share. Their journey wasn't easy. It required courage to defy society's expectations, strength to weather criticism, and unwavering commitment to each other when the world demanded they surrender. But they proved something timeless, that when two souls genuinely connect, when respect and partnership form love's foundation, nothing can stand against their union. The barriers we build between people, of class, background, and expectation, are ultimately illusions. Real worth comes not from what we inherit, but from how we love, how we fight for what matters, and how we lift each other toward our highest potential. Clara and Thomas didn't just win their love story. They rewrote the rules for everyone who came after, proving that courage combined with authentic connection can transform not just two lives, but an entire world.